It's one of the very few organizations on the planet that normally does not leave. So when you have a war, most organizations would leave, and UNICEF, so for instance, UNICEF never left Gaza throughout the conflict. We still have colleagues when most other organizations were leaving. We said this is not the time to leave. And that's quite often what we would do. So even at the government level, there's quite often a recognition that the world is not perfect, and there's always a way to make a difference.
So I'd like to thank the Kin for having us here today. Thank you to Oliver and Michael and Taylor and Julian and the team. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas. So Thomas runs the Global Office of Innovation for UNICEF. And we're going to dig into what UNICEF is and does. But I want to start, Thomas, with your personal story. What is your journey to get here? How did you arrive? Start from the beginning. Where did you come from? How did you get into humanitarian work?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Great to be here. Great to be here. Thank you to the Kin for having me, and thank you for spending your time and quite a bit of energy making this work. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, the whole beginning for me would say I was like most kids out of high school, didn't really know what to do in my life. The sempiternal questions, what's next? I had no idea. And so my parents said, well, do economic studies so that you open or you close as few doors as possible. And so this is what I did with no particular enthusiasm. And by year 4, I had an epiphany. I had a moment, I had an awakening where I realized, actually, that's the life I want. I want to live a life of service. And I, at that time, had been studying political sciences and economics in various contexts, and realized that many, many billions of people were really struggling in their day-to-day, and I wasn't, and I felt that there's one way that I can help. That's what I'd like to do. And I didn't really know how to start. And in France at that time, the military service was mandatory for everyone. And you could either do 1 year of military service with the grunts, or if you didn't want to do that, you could do 2 years of service in the NGO community. And so that's what I did. And I started that in Romania. And so ever since, I really didn't turn back. And so one job led to another, and I finally joined UNICEF in Kosovo in 2000, some time back.
In 2000. Can you spent a lot of time in conflict areas around the globe, especially early in your career. Can you tell us about some of those formative experiences and give some color to what that aspect of your life looked like?
Yeah, so again, I didn't know what to do. What particular area. Initially, I thought I wanted to work for refugees. I worked for the UN agency that supports refugees for some time. And then I was then brought to Kosovo working on, at that time, human rights. The idea was to monitor what was happening in Kosovo. It was still under Serbian control. And at that time, there was significant tensions. For those of you who may remember, there was one of the NATO war in Europe, which essentially forced Serbia to let go of Kosovo, which is now seen as a country. But when I was there, I was doing human rights investigation. And because we were an international organization trusted by the Kosovars, where something was happening, they would call us before they would call the police, because they didn't trust the police, because the police was Serbian, essentially. It was a Serbian institution at that time. And so one of the, I think, moment that I realized, okay, this is really what I want to do, is I was called in. I was at that time in my early 20s, and we had to look into three young men who had been tortured and then killed. And they were brothers of the same family, and they essentially had refused to give information to one of the police units, actually. And I realized that the community was expecting us to help them figure out who had done it, which really was impossible because it was going into the police department. So that's when I decided, okay, there's so many of these people who have no answer. There's no justice. There's no accountability. There's no system really for them. They are the weaker party, and the world functions like this. And I want to be a part of those institutions that are going to be providing some measure of balance, if I can. So I didn't, of course, solve these murders. We were able to link them to the local police, but that's about it. There was no justice. But then, part of that was really telling me, okay, I want to work in this. And then that's when UNICEF got a hold of me. They asked if I wanted to work for them and for children. And we were evacuated because of the war of NATO. We were then brought back in. And again, you come back in, and part of your life in emergency settings is you work 15, 16 hours a day, and then you try to spend some time having dinner with some friends, and you talk about work. So your life is just work, and it's exhausting. But if you care, it's also very fulfilling because you see the impact that you're having really on people. You can see people literally lives being saved because of what you do or don't do. You have a few moments where you also realize you risk your life. At that time, I was young, so to me it came with the territory, right? And so I remember one evening we were talking with some friends after dinner, and we were just talking, and then at some point, and walking back to our rental, and at some point somebody said, "Are you seeing the signs that this place has been demined?" Because normally there's signs saying, okay, this area is safe to walk in because it's been demined. So the Serbs, as many occupying powers, when they left a lot of mines and a lot of tricky mines. So for kids, for people, so they put a mine in a can of Coke in the street and you kick it, and there was a grenade in it, all kinds of things like this. So the demining was important, and we realized that we had actually, because we were talking, walked into a minefield. And so thankfully it was winter and there was snow. So we walked back for about 500 meters on the prints that we could see, so that we couldn't actually, that we were trying not to walk anywhere else. So that's the kind of life that that one has, but it's both a bit crazy. I think many people get into all kinds of mental health issues because you work so very hard, and so you develop, and you're supposed to bring support to others, and so you're not really looking out for support to yourself. So all kinds of issues, but also incredibly rewarding.
So what inspired you early on to dedicate yourself to service? What was it in your upbringing? What is it in your conditioning that motivated you to pursue this life?
So my parents were hardcore Christians, and very, very dedicated. And I guess now that I'm an adult, I would say they were even borderline into a sect. They were, they believed in, again, service. They believed in giving. They believed in God very, very deeply. And so, for my upbringing was church, and they were reformed, but it was going to church. It was helping others. Every weekend you'd do something. Every weekend we'd welcome people in the community. We hosted people who had issues with drugs in our family for years, to try to get them back onto a life of fulfillment. And I guess in my family, it's always been, if you have with you the means to help in one way or another, that's what you should do, because others don't have the means. And then my parents maybe took that even further and said, if you have the skills and the power, those are given by God, and so you should give back. That's just a gift that came from the beginning, and you don't have to give back in the way that I did it. So when I did that, my father, who's an entrepreneur, actually said, so you're not going to produce any value, you're just going to use values that is going to produce by others to distribute it. And we had a running fight for years when I was saying, I'm using my days and my time and my energy in ways that is more meaningful. And he kept saying, yes, because I'm producing resources that allow you to do that. But the giving was always there. The providing services was always there. So it's been for all of us in the family, that's always been the North Star.
Well, that's a good pivot to what I wanted to go into next, which is you spent a lot of the early part of your career in, what we discussed as kind of repair zones, right? You were trying to go in and be of service in conflict zones when things really needed to be fixed, and giving a lot of yourself. And I'm sure the burnout was very real. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And then your father was saying, he entrepreneur, need to build things. I feel like there's the next phase of your career where you actually have very, very much been in that build mode, right? And I think UNICEF as an organization kind of represents both sides of that. Maybe we could actually talk about UNICEF as an organization, just to talk about that dichotomy. You call UNICEF a bipolar organization. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say you said that, but what do you mean by that? And tell me about tell us about the dual aspect of kind of what UNICEF does around the world. I think people know of UNICEF, and it has one of the best brands of any organization on the planet, and rightfully so. But can you tell us more about UNICEF as an organization, kind of your journey through it?
Sure. So UNICEF, for those who may not be fully cognizant, is one of the UN organizations. The focus is on children and really making children's lives better in the world. It's one of the largest UN organizations on the planet. It covers about 190 territories. It has about 20,000 staff and a budget of about 8 billion, something like that. 8 to 9 billion, depends on the years, less now than before. And one of the peculiarity of UNICEF is that it's quite well known for doing crisis response. So what I got into it at the beginning, where we really deliver, life-saving food, nutrition for children malnourished, but also we work on healthcare, we work on education in emergencies, we work on violence against women and young children, et cetera, and that's what we are normally the most. What's most known about us is that emergency responder, and it is incredible the work that is done. And it's one of the very few organizations on the planet that normally does not leave. So when you have a war, most organizations would leave, and UNICEF. So, for instance, UNICEF never left Gaza throughout the conflict. We still have colleagues. When most other organizations were leaving, we said this is not the time to leave. And that's quite often what we would do. And then there is another part of UNICEF that does what we call development. So it's essentially working on a country not in crisis. And I was deployed in Algeria, in Djibouti, in Thailand, where you work with the with the governments and the Ministry of Education, of Health, of Water, of Social Protection, to try to really better the lives of their children. And this is really not about crisis issues. It's about long-term building a nation that will be a nation fit for purpose for children in that nation to be thriving and to have the best lives they possibly can have. And so that goes from trying to essentially stop child mortality, neonatal mortality, under 5 mortality, maternal mortality, to then vaccination, access to vaccination, to then the quality of healthcare, quality of education, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes to all the facets. So that there is this dichotomy. This is why I quite often say UNICEF it's schizophrenic or bipolar, because even in the organization, you have people who just love the first part. Right? Because there is a lot of adrenaline, it's a bit crazy, you risk your life, you have a little bit of a hero complex quite often. And then on the other side, it's much longer term. You probably work a couple of years, and then quite often you don't really see the impact. It takes years for social impact to be visible. So it's people who are a lot more chill, but also maybe not as fun.
Can you tell us a little bit about your personal shift? Was there a point when you realized that you wanted to shift from kind of that repair work to that development work? How did that shift happen for you?
So I worked about 14 years on emergency response, and I went from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Yemen, Sudan, Palestine. Most of the conflict you can think of, I was there.
Really easy appointments, yeah.
Yes. And it was very fulfilling, but it was also very intense. and I would say there were two things that really pushed me into the development bit. One, I fell in love and started to want to have a family, and so it's harder to walk into a war zone when you have responsibilities, because it's not just your life that you're risking, but it's you have to carry. So that was important, but also, honestly, at that stage, I got really tired. I felt that we in that life we work like dogs, but we work like dogs quite often to try to put a band-aid on problems that are human created. And it became really exhausting for me to feel I'm giving everything that I have, literally everything, to this. And in many countries of the world, once the politics are bad, they stay bad, and so there is another conflict 5 years later, or another issue which is man-made, or the French president will decide that they won't be supporting that country anymore, and you're gonna have a crisis or whatnot. And it just became, I kept feeling, it's this time that is really used to better people's lives, and it was saving lives. But it felt too much like a band-aid. It felt hard to just keep doing that and not having long-lasting impact. And so I wanted to try that. And so since about 2012, 13, I've been working on that development side.
So I want to jump to your work in innovation. And let me ask you the question this way. Why, when UNICEF is facing cuts in the billions with a B, right? Over $1 billion, I think. Why innovation? Why is innovation important now when it feels like the world is burning down in so many areas, quite literally? Why invest in innovation?
Yeah, so the estimate of this year is we will have lost between last year and this year anywhere between $2 to $3 billion of income. So very significant. And I could be flippant and say the Office of Innovation is based in the Nordics, so in Stockholm, in Sweden. And when you live next to what used to be the Nokia headquarters, you understand the value of innovation and keeping focused on innovation, because it disappeared because it stopped innovate. And some of that is true, right? So the world is moving. You have more and more foundations in the aid business, which is right. And so it means you have more and more competitors as well, saying to a Ministry of Health or Ministry of Education, I have a better solution. Don't ask UNICEF. I can provide. And that's great. I think that's very healthy. It also means that if you don't keep inventing and thinking, how do I do that better, more effectively, more efficiently, then you are going to be, moved out of the way by people who are keeping that edge. So I very much believe that. And the reality is that even an organization as large as UNICEF, with $8 to $10 billion a year, we always feel under-resourced, because the scale of the needs is just incredible. And it's a weird world that we live in, where we have, and of course you see that in the US as well, but you have a few member states, a few governments in the world where the standards of living are fantastic, and so many other countries where the standards of living are terrible. And so the needs every year vastly outstrip what we can bring of resources. And so there is a requirement, there is an urgency to innovate. And maybe another reason, for those of you who may know about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is an alignment of what do we want for the world, where all the countries until recently had signed off to that alignment. If you look at the ambition for children's lives, mothers, access to work, health, etc., we would have to multiply progress that we've seen over the last 15 years by 4. So 400% faster if we want to reach those ambitions. And so innovation, I keep saying, well, you don't need another reason. If you really want to move the needle for children faster, we're just going to need to think outside the box, try things we've never tried, be bold, be crazy. That's the only way forward.
And I've been really blown away as I've dived deeper into UNICEF. I mean, people think about UNICEF as this relief and recovery organization. one, UNICEF it has an infrastructure kind of unlike any other organization on planet Earth. 190 plus countries and territories. The head of any UNICEF delegation basically has, diplomatic status, right? UNICEF is a really remarkable organization, and that contributes to why it is so interesting as an innovator as well. And I'm going to let you tell the innovation story at UNICEF, because UNICEF is so much more forward-thinking than I could have possibly imagined, especially for a large NGO, a UN agency. Tell us what innovation means for UNICEF, and give us kind of the picture of what the Office of Innovation does.
So the short of it is, okay, so we know that about 1 billion people don't have access to toilets in their homes, right, today. We know that out of the children who are in school who are 10 years old, all over the world, 7 out of 10 cannot explain to you a text that they read. That's 9 out of 10 in Africa. So the systems are not working for billions of kids. And of course, because we're UNICEF, we focus on children. So we know that in so many ways. We know that there's 250 million kids out of school. We know that there's about 1 woman out of 3 who will have been either raped or have suffered through domestic violence connected to sexual violence. 1 out of 3 in the world. So there's some crazy numbers everywhere that you look. And so part of what my team does is, okay, what could we do that would really be transformational in the pace of change that we could offer? And so we look at what exists, and we try to figure out what are others doing that we think may be amazing, that we should bring. And others can be startups, it can be large companies, it can be other nations in the world. So we know, for instance, Singapore now education system is outstripping everybody else. Right? How are they doing that? What's working really well? Right? Finland is also great at that. So we're trying to learn around this. And then we try different things, and we try to then scale that from one country to the next. And then we have a range of teams that are focused on different problem sectors, and we have a team that is focused on tech. And that team functions like a venture fund, in the private sector. And so they get donations, and they design a problem and ask a question. So if we look at how do we figure out which adolescent is struggling with mental health issues, how could we do that better through technology, any kinds of technology? So we do a call, and that call is focused on normally entrepreneurs from the global south, any country that we operate in. And the focus is, tell us what you do that we can understand and learn from, that we can then take to scale. So part of the requirement is you can apply if you're in the global south, and it has to be open source, so that the core can be proprietary, but the solution has to be open source. You can still make money, there's no problem. So most of the partners that are actually private sector company. And then we're gonna support you with $50 to $100K for about 12 to 18 months. And we're going to look into things that we haven't dared think about or dared try with you. And so some of those things can look like, how do I use technology to understand how very significant air pollution in East Asia and Pacific is killing kids, because young children have a much lower pulmonary capacity than adults. So once they get into heavy pollution, they can actually die. So how do we get kids to use technology to say, hey, my school is not safe? How do we manage that? To using now Gen AI to translate textbooks for children with visual impairments or who are deaf, so that they can have interactive textbooks. And that is going to revolutionize access to education for these kids in different ways. We do all kinds of crazy stuff with those teams. So that's a little bit the way we work. And then we also do kind of blended finance impact investing to try to understand how do we bring people who want to change the world but want to make a living out of it also work for them.
I can't even drive home how remarkable it is. Anyone who's ever worked with or at a major global NGO can get a sense of how remarkable it is that UNICEF has had a venture fund for the last 10 years that's investing in early stage solutions to entrepreneurs around the world. it's pretty amazing. They've developed a real track record. And speaking of that track record, can you give us a sense of some of the investments that the venture fund has made that have moved the needle? What have you been most excited about?
Yeah, it's been operating for 10 years. We've made about 140 investments, or we're reaching about 40 million kids directly now through these investments. Part of what we're super proud is that actually we have a majority of female founders, 62% of female founder, which in the impact space is quite rare. And they are the ones who actually are surviving better than their male counterparts on average, which is also interesting. And so part of what we see in that reach is powerful for us. We're also using crypto, so we are the first and the only UN agencies that are operating fully in cryptocurrency. So we have the ability to take in crypto and then use crypto to partner with communities or companies that are willing to take in crypto. So we are actually operating in crypto. Many of our colleagues and partners just transform into fiat immediately. But we think it's transformational because it transforms the power of understanding what they do with the money that you share with them and the resources that they do. It's fully transparent, which means you take away all of the accusations and misunderstandings around corruption. Where does the money go? And it also enables them to have an immediacy of when we transfer the money and at no cost to us. So there's all kinds of use cases. We can do smart contracting in different ways. So in terms of the reach, the crypto, the venture fund has started so many initiatives, but I would say one that is really powerful in my mind is that air pollution company. It started as a very small company. It's now reaching 12 countries, about 10 million kids. We started another company support in Mexico, which was working on using AI, data science, and machine learning to teach math to children with learning disabilities, autism in particular. And that was so powerful that it's now reaching about 11 million kids in about 12 countries. As well. We're using right now something that I just described, which I'm super excited by. It's a partnership with OpenAI, with a company which essentially enables you to take a textbooks, automate the translation of that as an interactive digital textbooks with interactivity for the child, either with visual impairment to be audio connected to that textbooks or with deafness to be visually connected to that textbooks. We're still working through because, Gen AI is still maturing, so it doesn't allow you to do everything. But we are so bloody excited by this because it is going to revolutionize access to learning. And what we don't realize is that most kids who are disabled in the world, that's it. They're kind of out of the society completely because most societies just don't have the systems to support them. So they just, frankly, I've seen kids with autism being chained to their radiator at home because they were so much of a problem for their parents to handle that they had to work for a living that they didn't want them to destroy the home, and they would just chain themselves, their own kids. So parents reach such a degree of desperation that they go to crazy length to protect their kids as well, right? So they felt, I need to go make a living. You can't kill yourself or whatnot, but I can't protect you, and I can't pay for anybody to support you. So anyway, so that project on translating books is going to revolutionize access to learning for hundreds of millions, and that's going to be just. If that's the only legacy I leave behind, that's enough.
It's a pretty good one, and I'm so happy that UNICEF is tracking and staying cutting edge on those technologies and developing those direct partnerships with the companies building the foundational models too. I want to take a quick aside, and we're at a moment when aid itself is being there are a lot of people casting doubt on aid, not just in the United States, but across the world, and I'd love to just get your thoughts on, as people are having conversations out in the world and having chats with their uncles who at a Memorial Day cookout who says, "Great, USAID's cut UNICEF. Like, who cares?" why should people care about aid? And this is probably a friendly room that understands why humanitarian aid matters, but give us your defense of why these programs are really important, especially in the uncertain moment we're in now.
Right. So I want to acknowledge that I'm an easy target. One, because this is the life I've given, so I'm clearly not going to be an objective responder. And two, because I'm the archetype of what many people say is wrong in those systems. Right. I've worked all my life in this. One could say I've never created value, and I'm a white man in his 50s, early 50s, and the perfect colonialist power telling other countries what to do, who are a different color than him. All of this is true, I guess. But what I found in my life is that there are a tremendous amount of support that one can offer to those in need in different ways. You can start at the local community, at the national level, all the way to international. I've decided to focus internationally. But there's so many ways to, I think, give and support. People who have had no choice and no agency to live the life they are living, we can make a difference for them, right? So I remember I was one of the first foreigners walking into Afghanistan after the Afghan war in Western Afghanistan, and I remember walking into a village which we didn't even know existed. So we were going on a field visit, and we didn't even know existed. It was it was really the heart of the winter. Afghanistan at that stage was losing 1 out of 4 of their children under 5. So 25% of children under 5 would die in Afghanistan because of the systems that they had here. And we walked in, and we discovered the village, and they said, "Oh, you're the first foreigners we've ever seen." And so we started to understand, what are your needs? And they said, we are desperately in need of emergency nutrition, particularly for us, but also for the young children. And we said, okay, we don't have anything with us, but we'll try to organize a convoy as quickly as we can. How long can you hold? And the village elder just pointed at tombstones, you said, where you bury burial ground, and said, there'll just be more when you come back. Be as fast as you can, because that's just where we are. And those people had done nothing to deserve that. And this has been my experience, is that those quite often who suffer the most have had no agency to really change that life, have had no power to change that. And yes, it is the way the world works, but that doesn't mean that we have to agree, and it doesn't mean that we cannot step in and support in the best way we can. Today, the cuts that have impacted already the industry after USAID, but to be fair, the US is not the only donor cutting. There's many other donors that are cutting. Aid is being impacted and is being targeted to some extent, is being challenged. The value of aid is being challenged, which of course is hugely problematic in my view. We estimate that a third of the NGOs working on humanitarian life-saving have disappeared already. So we've lost 30% of the people who were helping day to day, just because there's no money. So the support, the impact those people give goes from life-saving to life-changing. And I can tell you, every country that I worked in, we offer quite often UNICEF once a country becomes rich enough. So we determine that at upper middle income country level, we offer to step away and say, okay, so you don't need UNICEF. And the immense majority of the countries say, no, we have still so much we need to do for children. Please stay. So even at the government level, there's quite often a recognition that the world is not perfect, and there's always a way to make a difference.